So a House Select Committee has kicked off its investigation into the attack on the U.S. Capitol in January. At a hearing yesterday, 4 police officers who defended the building on January 6th described their experiences in vivid detail. Skyler Henry has more on their emotional testimony.
What we were suggested that day was like something from a medieval battle. We fought hand to hand, inch by inch.
4 police officers described the terror they endured when the mob of Trump supporters attacked the Capitol. Officer Daniel Hodges was trapped between a door and the attackers. He described one as foaming at the mouth.
If I stayed there, then I was gonna, pass out from lack of oxygen or get dragged out into the crowd.
The severely outnumbered officers said they feared for their lives as the angry crowd closed in.
You're gonna die tonight. I could feel myself losing oxygen and recall thinking to myself, this is how I'm going to die.
I heard chanting from some in the crowd, get his gun and kill him with his own gun.
One officer testified the crowd hurled racial slurs at him.
One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? They voted for Joe Biden."
Officers urged the committee to place blame for the breach on former President Trump.
All of them were telling us Trump sent us.
If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them.
While Democrats promise a thorough investigation, many Republicans continue to embrace former President Trump's downplaying of the attack, prompting frustration from officers.
The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful.
Nearly 550 people have been arrested in the months since the breach. Officials promise more will be held accountable. Skyler Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
I want to bring in Molly Hooper now to talk more about what we saw on Capitol Hill yesterday. So, listen, Molly, I got to admit that when I first heard that there would be, officers talking about what that day was like for them, I thought to myself initially, we've sort of heard these stories already. We've seen an awful lot of video. It's horrendous, stomach churning, but I don't know if there's going to be anything new here. Boy, was I wrong. Their retelling of the day was so emotional, I'd use the phrase again, stomach churning. I mean, Congressman Kinzinger basically was sort of holding back tears as he tried to ask his questions. It was very moving. There's a reason why they kicked things off this way. Can you talk about the tone that was set by listening to these 4 gentlemen speak?
Well, Anne-Marie, you just said it. That's exactly what it was. It was stomach churning, graphic. I think that we experienced that day from a different perspective, not just the video that we saw in the second impeachment hearings, but really from the perspective of the individuals who were getting, as Mike Fanone said, electrocuted with tasers several times at the base of his neck, who then went on to suffer a heart attack and traumatic brain injury. We heard about how these individuals were getting hit with clubs, how protesters, rioters, were trying to take their weapons, were trying to grab shields, were spraying them with essentially chemicals, gas. It almost sounded like mustard gas, even though that's not what it was, but it just sounded like it was a real battle, like we were on a battlefield. And that, what the speaker wanted to do was juxtapose that with what what many Democrats are calling whitewashing of a variety of Republicans who said that day was it was like normal tourist day. The protesters were orderly. They were walking through the Capitol like regular tourists. Well, in some cases, we saw people walking between stanchions on that day on Capitol Hill. But in other cases, and in a lot of cases, according to these police officers, there was a real battle going on. One of them described it as almost medieval. He read about, in medieval history, how it was hand-to-hand combat. And I think that, again, that was something to set the tone for future hearings going forward, because, again, I think the Democrats really wanted to push back against this narrative that these protesters were greeting Capitol Police with hugs and kisses, as the former President Trump has described it. Well, one officer, I believe it was Sergeant Gunnell, said, well, if that's hugs and kisses, no wonder people in other countries don't like American tourists, because this is not the way normal tourists behave in the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, exactly. And so speaking of, the narrative that some Republicans are trying to sort of put forth and the talking points, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and other Republican lawmakers spoke to reporters before the hearing yesterday. Here's some of what they said at that press conference.
I expressed my appreciation to the United States Capitol Police officers and all other officers who came to help keep the Capitol secure that day. What we've raised questions about is why were they not given more tools to prevent that from happening? And some of our members, including Jim Jordan, have been vocally raising that question, especially as it relates to what Speaker Pelosi knew. She needs to answer those questions. And instead of answering those questions, she removed members who were going to ask those questions.
So sort of right out of the gate with this press conference, the lawmakers are trying to sort of lay the blame at the feet of Speaker Pelosi. They kept on saying there was a failure of leadership, and they kept on suggesting that she was somehow responsible for the Capitol Police. This information or this assertion is not new. It's something that started to bubble up on the internet after the attacks in January. Can you offer some clarity here? Can you fact check? Is Nancy Pelosi responsible for the Capitol Police?
Well, I will fact check, because, one of the things that I was thinking initially as those attacks were unfolding was, where's Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi? Because much like major cities where a police chief reports to the mayor of a city, essentially, the U.S. Capitol Police Chief does report to the leaders of the House and the Senate, respectively. Even though they're not necessarily in daily contact, they are in daily contact with the Senate Sergeant at Arms, the House Sergeant at Arms, essentially the Speaker and the Majority Leader's representative on this police oversight board. So even though Nancy Pelosi wasn't involved in every single detail of how the police were manned that day, there was some consideration of what the Speaker would think was needed up there. And Republicans want to get to the bottom of how involved the Speaker was in that. But I don't think that you can limit it to Speaker Pelosi. I think you also need to expand that to Mitch McConnell, because he shares an equal role that the Speaker does in terms of making those ultimate decisions, especially on something as significant as having National Guard posted on Capitol Hill. Now, whether the House Sergeant at Arms contacted and discussed this with Speaker Pelosi before the decision was made initially not to have the National Guard up there is a different matter. But I think what Republicans are saying is we want to find out. But you can't limit that just to the Speaker. It's equally shared with the Senate Majority Leader, who at the time was Mitch McConnell. Now, and there's nothing to say that the committee won't look into that. But I think that what happened with the Republicans is that when Kevin McCarthy decided to boycott the committee altogether because Speaker Pelosi said, I'm not going to accept Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, two of Minority Leader McCarthy's picks, ostensibly he's removing any questions that follow along those lines from being present at those hearings, because without a Republican voice on that table, aside from Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, the Republicans essentially are not playing any role in asking those tough questions. And you can't tell me that Kelly Armstrong, who was also one of those Republicans selected initially, and Sheriff Troy Nehls, Rodney Davis, you can't tell me that they wouldn't ask questions in terms of preparedness and the intel available to Capitol Police on that day. But without those voices on that panel, because Minority Leader McCarthy removed them, it's hard to have any kind of role in say in where the committee goes in terms of those questions being asked.
Right. All right, really quickly, they don't have a deadline for a report or anything along those lines. So what's next for this investigation, this committee?
Well, it looks like the committee is going to sort of fast track the process of subpoenaing documents, because essentially what they want to know is who knew what when, how much did the former administration under President Trump, how much did key individuals in the administration know about what was being planned for January 6th. And so in order to get that information and documents, this committee, according to Adam Schiff, who is also on a Democrat, Adam Schiff is also a member of that committee, they're talking about fast tracking it, and instead of playing nice to the DOJ and saying, hey, can you send us some documents? We'd like to see this. The committee's just going to straight up subpoena the documents. They're not even going to, wait around. And really, we don't know exactly who will be called as a witness, but the chairman has not outright denied that he would try to call former President Trump and former Attorney General Bill Barr before the committee to ask these questions. Benny Thompson, the chairman, said that there may be a hearing at the end of August, but right now is a time for the current committee members to sort of digest what they heard and go from there.
All right, Molly, thank you so much.
You're welcome.